Welcome all of the schools from all over Australia that have joined us here today for the Jeffrey Walker webinar. I'd like to welcome Jeff. Jeff, it's fabulous to have you here.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everybody who's out there watching. I'm very grateful to you guys sharing your time with us.
And I'd like to thank the Queensland Education Department because we are here in Brisbane today at Education House, Brisbane being Jeffrey's hometown.
Yes,
so,
I don't spend a huge amount of time each year here, but when I'm here I love it. So there you go.
So we're delighted to be here, and I think what today will hopefully be about is giving us an insight into what's a pretty amazing career that Jeff's had, from child actor through to successful director, not just here in Australia but overseas. It's an incredible journey that you've had, Jeff, and we're looking forward to unpacking some of that. And I'm sure you'll have some advice and info for students watching all over the country. So I think we might kick off with a question, and we might start, I think, with a question that comes from Waverley Meadows Primary School in Victoria. I might ask this one. I don't know whether Waverley Meadows are on, whether we can perhaps cross to them, but if you can't, I'll ask the question for you, and it's what or who inspired you to become an actor in the first place, Jeff?
Well, I grew up in a family that had no actors in it whatsoever, so there wasn't really much of an artistic thread when I was growing up at home, any more than I had very supportive parents. And then I started watching films when I was young. I think the first film I remember watching was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, or Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I thought it was such a great adventure, and I could tell, I knew enough at that stage, 6 or 7, that, there were actors in movies, and so that was the thing that most inspired me. And I just wanted to be Indiana Jones, or be, Harrison Ford in the movie. So I also remember that I had a really good memory for remembering lines from movies, or even sometimes whole movies. So I used to drive my parents crazy with being able to recite, all of Peter Pan, for example. I remember watching that over and over. So I think as a kid, those two little things of sort of being, finding it captivating and inspiring to watch, movies, and then also the fact that I just loved remembering lines and saying lines over and over. And then when I started acting, I remember I had an agency. I think there was a young kid that I went to school with whose mum or dad had put him in an agency just local to where I lived and grew up in Bentley in Victoria. And his mum had spoken to my mum, and I was able to go and join an agency, and from there, I started to audition for television shows and movies, and I was away. But I still think that all of those sort of adventure films when I was a kid were the thing that got me most interested in it.
Okay. So what age were you when you started, or you got an agent and you started auditioning?
My very first, I was 7 years old when I started, and the very first thing I did was a television show in Australia called The Flying Doctors, which was a series that was like a medical procedural kind of series that took place in a certain country, Australia, where my character had fallen off his bike and hit his head in the bush. So they had to fly in the doctors and save me, as the title suggests. So and I remember it so clearly and so well, and I actually, believe it or not, even as recently as this year, still work with some of the crew that I worked with on that very first episode in 1989.
Wow.
So there you go. And from there, I got very lucky as a kid too, because from the age of 7, when I started auditioning for things, I had a very lucky run of getting role after role, and I just was so lucky that in that early stage, I didn't have to experience what you inevitably have to as an actor, which is that you won't get everything you go for. But for the first couple of years, I felt like you'd go for an audition, you'd get a job, and away you go. How much fun is this?
It was that easy.
And so then by the time I did get knockbacks, I had enough confidence to be able to, go, I'll try harder on the next one, see how I go, and that was it.
Okay. Fantastic. So what were your favourite TV shows when you were young? So obviously you had some feature films that you like. What about TV shows? What did you like watching?
The funniest thing is the very first show that I ever truly, truly loved watching, I watched with my older sister, was the first season of Round the Twist. And it was on, I think, Channel 7, and I think it was on Sunday mornings at 7:30 or 8 o'clock, so it was very early. And my sister and I, a couple of years older, would get up and watch it. And we just loved it. And, I would have been, I guess, about 7, and therefore, we might have started to get to watch a little bit of it at school, but otherwise, you would just watch it on the weekend. And then other TV shows I loved as I sort of got older. I remember when I was about 13 or so, or maybe a little younger, The X-Files was a really fantastic, like supernatural FBI Alien series. You know, if you happen to have seen that, it was like at the time really cool, and I thought The Simpsons was really funny as well. So I think they were the things that I most look forward to watching. And I'm a big sports fan, so I used to watch as much footy and cricket as I could, and bore my poor mum and sister stupid with having the cricket on all summer as well. Yeah.
So you mentioned Round the Twist, which obviously became very important in your life. Another question that's come in from Waverley Meadows Primary School was, how did you get the role then for Round the Twist? So you mentioned that you enjoyed watching Series 1 of Round the Twist, and it would have been 2 or 3 years later that Series 2. How did you get involved in auditioning for that and getting the role?
I was really fortunate at the time that Round the Twist, they were doing all of their auditions. I was working on a television show called Halfway Across the Galaxy and Turn Left, and it was based on a series of books by Robin Klein, I think, from memory. And so I had heard that the auditions were all coming up for this, and I was so excited. The funniest thing, I went in and did my auditions with the director. I remember where they were in Port Melbourne and everything. I have a very good memory for all this stuff, and also particularly because it's become so pivotal in the course of my life. You probably reflect upon it more than you might other things. But I remember doing my audition. I think I did 1 or 2 auditions, and then I just couldn't believe that I got it, because it was a show that I loved watching so much. The weirdest thing about it was like a little bit of trivia or something, was that the show, I ended up finishing this show on like a Friday, let's say, the one that I was on, Halfway Across the Galaxy and Turn Left, and starting on Round the Twist very soon after. And for this Alien show, this Halfway Across the Galaxy show, I had bright red hair that they'd had to dye, bright red. And so by the time I started shooting on Round the Twist, they tried to dye it back to my natural colour, which is more a blondie. It's almost a bit like it is now, but it was fairer when I was a little kid. And so I ended up in that series having sort of red hair, sort of blonde hair, depending on which episode you're watching. And so as I've grown older, they've all, so many people come up and go, "What happened to your red hair? Where's your red hair gone?" I didn't have it in the first place; it was acquired. But yeah, so I remember just being so thrilled. We spent so much time down at Airlie's Beach, where the lighthouse is, and then we filmed all of the studio stuff in Port Melbourne. And for a show that stayed with me for so many years and been so wonderful, it's it was such a short period of time. I think we shot it for about 12 or 13 weeks, and that was it. So this tiny little blink in the bigger picture of life ended up being this thing that was the catalyst for so much more, and just a fantastic and lasting project to be in.
And it's clear that Round the Twist is now an iconic program, sort of the history of Australian children's television, and it's greatly loved by not just, I'm sure there's students out there who still see repeats of Round the Twist repeated on TV, and I imagine many teachers out there who would have had Round the Twist perhaps as their favourite show. So adults and kids still love Round the Twist, even though it's quite a few years now since the last series of Round the Twist. How important has it been to your career, you think, being involved in something so iconic and so recognisable and so loved as Round the Twist?
I think it may be the only show that I was a part of that had, well, I've done a couple now, I think, that over in the States that have a significance to them. I think culturally, Round the Twist sort of spoke to so many kids all around the world. The royal family, the princes, everybody. It didn't matter where you were in the world. If you watched the show, then you enjoyed it, as I did as a kid watching it at home. And I think the other thing too was that it was shown when I was going to school at the same time as I was in it. It was shown in schools, so like if you had a rainy day or you're well behaved or whatever, you might get the reward of watching, Round the Twist episode. Novelty was a little lost on me because I had the tape at home. I could watch them anytime. But it had that sort of impact that it was really enjoyed. Often kids shows can, they're sort of, because they're written by grown-ups and they can speak down to kids sometimes. There was nothing about that in Round the Twist. It was really naughty and edgy for its time and kind of gross out and, funny and everything else. And I think that the fact that it connected with so many people, and I never, I did other series as I was growing up that, some kids were on the fence, or they'd happily tell me they didn't like them or whatever. Round the Twist, it was just a loved thing. And now it used to be that it's, even now sometimes, less now, but probably going back 5 or 10 years ago, I'd meet up with somebody out and about somewhere, and once they'd made that connection, they quite literally might not have thought about the show in 15 or 20 years, but the second you mention it, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I remember you were in that show and you haven't changed that much, you kind of look similar," or whatever. So, that's been the long-lasting impact, and I think the fact that it's sort of effectively gone out to a generation and a half of Australians, and that, you only need mention it, and most people have heard of it in some capacity or another. That's an extremely rare thing to happen in your career as a television or film person.
And the fact that it's such a distinctively Australian show, yet it's been so popular and successful internationally. It's sold into hundreds of countries around the world. How does that make you feel, knowing it's had such international appeal as well?
Well, it's such a strange thing. I mean, I've worked on shows that have sold around the world, and when the numbers get up into that amount, it's sort of like, I couldn't name them. I'm struggling to get above a couple of dozen, let alone hundreds. So I think that, with all of those territories that it goes out to, and the fact that this quirky, wacky show made in Melbourne, could, so beautifully written, by Esmond and Paul when I was working on it, could reach that many people is extraordinary. And I think, though, Australian children's television, that's the one common thread I've had from whether it's been directing on it or acting in it or whatever. The world appeal for what we make in Australia is huge, whether it's the beautiful beaches and, our weird storytelling voice, whatever it might be. I've had more that have travelled very, very well than haven't. They always find that very big audience and as big as, the Disney Channel in the US and BBC in the UK. I mean, these are the biggest outlets in the world. So, when you're sort of reaching that, we're doing something right here in Australia.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've had a question come through from Imogen, who's at the Scott School in Albury. I don't know whether we have the Scott School online or whether Imogen and perhaps asked her question. There we are. Hi guys, great to see you there. Imogen, would you like to ask Jeff your question?
My question was, what advice would you give someone trying to enter the acting industry that you wish you'd known at our age?
Well, thank you for the question. I think that, the hard thing with acting, that there's sort of two things. You can have the passion for it and do it at almost any level. So you can write a script and shoot anything you like or put on a play anytime you like. And I would encourage anyone who's got an interest in acting to do that. There's also theatre groups and people who want to get together and do that with you anywhere in Australia. So there's always an outlet in that regard. I think the thing for me, that when you take the step and if you're hungry enough to sort of make it your focus, if you want to make it your career or make it a profession, I think you have to be so thick-skinned, because now I've seen it from a director's point of view. A great actor can come in and do a fantastic audition for something and they're really hungry for the role, they've prepared it beautifully and done all that, and then they come in and they still miss out on the part because, they said, we might go with someone else, or I saw this other person the other day, and then suddenly this person who's done a fantastic job won't get that. So it is actually kind of it's the criminal side of trying to be an actor as a profession. But if you keep your passion, for it strong, keep working at it and keep performing it as often as you can, and when you go to an audition, I think the advice that I would have loved to have gotten, that I would impart, and that I would impart to people who are into it, is that go to the audition. If you play it in that audition the way that you would want to play it if you were to get the role, take the direction if they give you any, and then when you leave, just say, well, that's as much as I can do. Everything else is completely out of my hands. If you leave it going, I wish I'd done this, then that's only preparation, for next time to think about. But not having your spirits broken by how that sort of long attrition that can be in terms of trying to find that role is the best. Is to persevere, stay with it, and try to take ownership and take back a bit of power as an actor as much as you can. And that's by writing your own stuff, performing monologues, make a movie with your friends, do anything you can to sort of stay acting, because otherwise you're at the behest of directors and casting people, and they'll make decisions beyond your comprehension. So because you'll never know why you missed out on things. But stay with it would be my advice.
That's a great question, Imogen, so thank you so much for that one. We have another question from Waverley Meadows, and it relates back to, I suppose, when you were a child actor. What was it like juggling school, home and acting, which I imagine, given you started very young, you were juggling all of those things when you were 10 and when you first started on Round the Twist and then the Wayne Manifesto, Ocean Girl. So how did you juggle all of those parts of being a young actor and still doing your schoolwork? And I imagine there was probably still a social life and other things involved. Yeah. How did you get that under control?
Well, I had an extremely normal home life in the best possible way, so I have no one in my family are actors or in the film industry, so I was a middle child and I was the odd one doing this kind of acting thing that they were all very supportive of. I didn't have any sort of home was always such a fun place for me growing up, and really loving mum and dad and brother and sister who were very supportive. They, if I was ever lucky and was getting to travel for work, there was never any jealousy. They were just supportive.
Oh no, it's looking at me for some reason.
So I had a very normal home life that kept me very grounded while I was working, and I played sport on the weekends and played with my friends after work or after school or whatever it happened to be. The school life was very unusual because I was only at school for maybe 6 months of the year, and the rest of the time I would have a tutor on set and a chaperone, and my school that I was at, and I went to Bentley West Primary School, McKinnon Secondary College and Sandringham College, and the teachers would kindly, out of their own time, have to sort of formulate what they were doing in the curriculum for the next month or so, send that through to my tutor, and then I would make sure I'd done that by that date. Sometimes I'd go for a couple of weeks where the shooting was very busy, and so therefore I'd fall 2 weeks behind, and then the next 2 weeks I had to make up for it. And the hardest thing for me was that when I did go back to school, which I did want to do, for me personally, I didn't want to do it via correspondence the whole year. I wanted to sort of go back and see my friends at school and do all of that. The big thing for me was that I wanted to kind of come back and be, up to speed with where the other kids were. Sometimes it wouldn't work out. I remember landing back in about year 8, landing back in a science class, and they had completely moved on to something that I wasn't ready for. Yep. And it's the worst feeling. It just feels like you've been dropped in the ocean, So that was pretty stressful. But then, I was happy to work really hard to catch up and,
Yep.
do all that. For me, there was a little transition where acting, in the balance of all those three things, went from sort of being, a hobby to being, a career and a profession, and I saw it as, my passion and what might end up being, my life's work across, across the different platforms. So I was always very into it, and I also used a lot of my time on set as an education, so where some people come in and learn their lines and do all that, I was so interested in how the camera worked and how the lighting gear worked, and they have this thing called a dolly. They put the camera on, it goes up and down and moves the thing around like a camera crane. I was just fascinated by all that stuff, So I think that I did see my time as like a long apprenticeship on set, studying all the different jobs, people who'd schedule the day, and all of this stuff was fascinating to me. So, and ultimately, I think there was a line in the sand moment where I thought, well, I'm not necessarily going to have a fallback to this industry, so I better pay attention and find a job within it.
Yeah. So I imagine in terms of where you had the tutor, you'd have to be fairly disciplined in terms of when you weren't shooting and you're off in, I don't know, whether it was a caravan or a tent,
exactly
or wherever
right.
they had you.
Yep, both of those.
So you had to be fairly disciplined to make sure you got that work, your schoolwork done.
Yes.
Before then you were shooting a scene, etc. And then when you headed back to school to catch up with what might have been work that perhaps you had to do. So you would have to be pretty disciplined around that, I imagine.
Yeah, I think that it's helped a little because there's like a couple of people that it's in the company when they hire you as a child have to provide you with education and a chaperone and everything. So they're there to sort of make sure that if I started to spend too much time watching how everything was being made on set, they just politely steer me away and put me in the tent or the caravan to go and do my studying. And the tutors were fantastic, and they had to be across all subjects. You don't get a different tutor for each subject. They had to be across all of them. I had this amazing person called Rob Bailey stay with me through, almost all of my, high school life, a little bit of my primary school life as well. And having that continuity of teacher was fantastic as well. But yes, you had to have, I think I had, as a young person, even now, quite a lot of, self-discipline when it comes to application to a task, So when I took all of year 12 off from acting and was just at school, and I, really enjoyed year 12 for that, and I was really focused on it. It wasn't something that I kind of slacked off from. I enjoyed it while I was there. I didn't do particularly challenging subjects in a traditional sense. I didn't hit the hard maths and sciences and so on, but I certainly loved it, and I think that I do have a sort of a level of self-discipline that, and motivation that's helped me in those sort of situations you were talking about.
Our research suggests that you starred in 217 episodes of Around the Twist, Ocean Girl and the Wayne Manifesto from the age of 10 onwards, and that you weren't just a minor part in those, you actually did star in those shows, so you were a major focus in each of those series. So I imagine in terms of what you learnt at that young age of being involved in 3 highly successful programs, both here in Australia and overseas, and what you learned about the craft of acting, and as you were taking an interest in what was happening on set. Looking back now, what do you think you learned from being so pivotal in those 3 series?
It's so funny because, like, for me, I think, well, the Wayne Manifesto was a show I made in Brisbane, I think in '96 when I was about 14. And that was the first time I had a lead. I'd been acting for 7 years in different television shows. The first time I had the lead. I'd been a lead, but not the lead. And I remember that was a game changer from my point of view because I saw it as a big responsibility and I wanted just to do a great job with that. And I thought it was a great character and a really great role. So that one was a bit of a game changer, and to be completely frank, on the other ones, I loved acting, but so much more of it for me was the camaraderie with the other cast and being on set and seeing, the crew work. Quite often you shoot for so many hours, it's like such a long day on a film shoot, and you're with a lot of crew members who are away from their children as well, so you sort of end up having all these mums and dads on set, and you become the child of and they're always going to be nicer to you than any teacher or probably parent has to be, or an aunt or uncle who might give you a hard time because they're there to work and they're going to be nice to you and stuff. So I remember just loving that environment so much so that when I sort of came to directing as an adult, I came to it much more from being able to understand how like the craft side of it, of being able to run a set and see all that work, much more than what's actually more important in the end, which is your storytelling voice as a director coming through to tell a story. But I just used that entire period of time on all those episodes and different things just to learn how a set ran, and had wonderful mentors and people who would just go out of their way and explain things to you that that I'll never forget, and have there's conversations, certain people I grew up working with over and over again, and there wouldn't be a conversation of theirs that we had over the 10-year period that I've forgotten. It's like they were really pivotal, inspiring people. And so if you get those people, and the same thing happens with teachers. You get a great teacher suddenly talk to you about English, math, whatever, drama, whatever it is, they just open your mind up to this, and so I was fortunate to have a few of those people in those roles. And I think the die was cast at that point. I think I was, destined to do one thing. That's it.
And it sounds like you were very naturally curious and inquisitive.
Bordering on annoying, I'm
annoying?
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think I was listening to a podcast you gave, I think, a month or 2 back, where you spoke about just how much you enjoyed being on set, whether you were acting or just as you were describing what the cinematographer was doing, what the director was doing, what the other crew were doing. Yeah. You were just naturally curious and loved that experience of being on a set. So then later on, as you moved out of acting, you still enjoyed obviously just being part of that environment and those creative mix of skills that those people were using. Yeah, well, it's been, I don't know any other reality really, like since I was 7, so that's now, what's that, 20-something years, 26 years or something like that of doing all this. I mean, it's, it's just been, it's been my life. So really, that being on set, I feel really excited to be there. And it's so weird because you must think, it must get monotonous. You do the same thing for all that time. But every day on a shoot is completely different. You never do the same scene twice. You never really, in the bigger picture, you're never working with the same team twice, so there's always a sort of a nervousness and an excitement after all these years of doing on every single project. There's no comfort zone ever, and that's kind of exciting in itself. And I remember coming home to my mum and dad, and even when I was, as an actor as a kid, and just say, I just had the best day today. And they would say, I don't often come home from work and say I had the best day at work today, but I felt that, so many times, and now I do it with my wife. I just say, well, I had a great day, and this is what happened, and that's what happened. So and I think that anyone, and I think that's why it's almost like you get bitten by the bug a bit with the film business. And I grew up working with lots of kid actors, for example, who are still acting now, or pursuing it at the very least, because they just had so much fun doing it. It's just like it's quite ridiculous that it's a job you get paid for, really, because it's so much fun. And then ultimately, what's the great payoff is we get to share it with an audience out there, and if they respond to it, that's even better. That's the icing on the cake. Yeah, no, it must be incredibly rewarding, I imagine. We're heading back to Elizabeth Murdoch College, Raya. So I don't know whether Raya, if you're there, if you'd like to ask Jeffrey your question, otherwise I'll ask it for you. So it was, what strategies did you use to overcome nerves during auditions as a child actor? Pretty important one, that one. Well, I've never overcome nerves, I think, is the main thing. I think every day I'm a little bit nervous, when we start shooting, even just getting out of the car in the morning, turning up to location, I'm a little bit nervous. I think that the big thing is that
I remember I was a huge preparation person. Some actors are fabulous because they just turn up and they can improvise, or you can throw them a line. Hey, can you say this time? And they just go, poof, and it'll go straight into their head and they're away. I had to be really prepared. I had a really strict, method as to how I would learn my lines. If I didn't do that, I would probably be, or at least I thought I'd be absolutely terrible. And so for me, I was a real prep-based person. And then if I had the preparation on my side, then I felt like I could do anything on set, because if someone threw something at me, at least I'd always have that to fall back on. Whereas just being sort of out there in the abyss of creative choices made me really nervous. Some actors are wonderful in that environment. I would be too nervous. So for me, I always fell back on my prep. Even as a director now, I still fall back on my preparation. I'm always constantly looking for new ideas and different a different way to view things, to make things better, to look at what an actor's doing and respond to what they're doing. But I'll still always go in with my storyboards and my plans and how I'm going to film it, right down to the shot of the phone on the desk, and everything's always sort of planned out. But then I love deviating from it. That gives me confidence. If I went in there without it, I'd be nervous that I just wouldn't be able to bring it all together. So for me, I was a preparation-based person. It's not for everybody to be that prepared and retentive about it all, but I certainly was, and that was the way I kind of overcame that nervousness.
And I imagine that's held you in good stead in whatever you've done.
Well, I think producers like when you're prepared.
Yes.
So if they see you doing all your drawings and everything, they go, oh, he's got a plan. I don't know what it is, but he's doing something over there, And I think as an actor too, that you would turn up and know your lines. I remember there was a few times, and it really was only a few times over the 10 years that I worked as an actor, that I was thrown a scene that day. Hey, listen, we're running a bit early. Can we shoot this scene? And I would try to learn it, and I couldn't. And under that level of pressure, I get too nervous, and I just somehow either bluff my way through it with their help, or I'd just say, can we just do this another time? I'm rubbish, So, so I was flawed in that way, but as long as I stuck to my approach, I usually felt pretty confident each day.
And in terms of now your role as a director, Jeff, you're working with actors. Do you have an expectation they'll be as prepared perhaps as you would have been?
I could care less. If they come in and nail it in whatever their preparation is, I'm thrilled. I certainly wouldn't put if it's a young actor coming through, I'm happy to chat to them about different approaches, what might work for, what worked for me, and see if that works for them. By the time you're working with, actors like Guy Pearce or Chris Lilly, or these, really big actors, or the cast of like Modern Family or something, however they want to bring that to work is completely up to them, And all I try and do as a director for those really great actors is create a space that is conducive to them giving a great performance. So if they like to come in, they want things to happen really quickly, I'll make it happen really quickly. If they want to come in and talk for a really long time, not sure about this, I'm struggling through, I'll have that we'll sit down, clear the set, sit down, let's have a chat about it. Whatever their process is, I will completely adapt, to work for them. I was just particular in the sense that I loved coming in, with everything completely down pat, and I used to see that as a kind of, for myself, and a confidence builder, but as a badge of honour that I was that prepared. But you certainly don't have to do that to give a great performance.
Okay. So I suppose it's about the end product.
Totally.
Really?
I'll do anything for a great end product. That's it, yeah.
We've just had a couple of really nice questions come in from Reese High School, which I think is in Tasmania.
Great.
I might just ask one that was from Crystal. Crystal sent this in. Given what you've just been talking about, do you ever think, I can't do this? If so, how do you get past it?
Oh, yeah. I think that I often, particularly with the last few projects I've done, I've said quite vocally, not even in my own head, I can't do this. I've done, boy oh boy. So yeah, so I did just a film recently that took me completely into a world I'd never set foot in, really, to the extent certainly to be able to tell their story. And so I was so sure that, there'll be another director out there who's going to find this better than I, and so, yeah, I think that, but I would say too that something inside me clicks. If I realise it's a good script, but my biggest fear is that I can't do this, then that's something goes like, come on, you can. Let's give this a spin, So then it becomes like you probably could do it, but you're just going to have to work harder than you might have lived completely in your wheelhouse and was something that, you could take to instantly. You're just going to have to dig deeper. And that to me, again, I think, as you can tell probably from the through line, I have a strong work ethic. So therefore, if I'm nervous about it, but I think it's going to make a great film, then I have to just work harder to be on it and work on it. So yeah, but I think that niggling question of I can't do this, just use it to inspire yourself, you know, and anyone else who says it to you too. It's like, it's great. I actually love hearing sometimes they go, you won't be able to do that, you know, or particularly like sometimes I have work on 2 projects at once and they clash, they have a date clash, and often it'll be like, ugh, I don't think we'll be able to make this work. I'm like, we'll make this work, we'll make this work. So I use it to sort of, you know, as a moment of empowering. You take the vulnerability, the nervousness of hearing it, even from yourself or from someone else, and then just take it, own it, and make it great.
Great advice. And the film you were mentioning, or you'd actually mentioned, is your latest feature film. Would you like to tell us what that film is?
So I directed a film called Ali's Wedding, which is effectively a romantic comedy with, you know, really nice heart to it, that's set within an Iraqi community within Melbourne. And so it sort of looks at this first or youngest generation of immigrants that are trying to fit in between the world that their parents were brought up in and the world that they're now presented with, which is, you know, Australia in 2017. And this particular story is a true story about this set of absurd events where this young guy, to try to impress his dad and his community, lied about getting into medicine, and said that not only did he get in, he got the top score that you could possibly get on your game set. So his whole community is, you know, excited for him. In actual fact, he failed. And but he still turned up to university each day and sat in on lectures and went to the library with the plan that he would resit this exam and actually pass it. But in the process of that, he became like this fantastic doctor to be within his community, and he's paired off to be married to another fantastic woman who thinks he's going to be this great doctor, and his whole world crumbles apart. And so it's a very funny film. We've just been at the Sydney Film Festival with it, and the reaction to it was wonderful. It gets lots of laughs and ultimately serves to, you know, humanise you know, a group of people that, you know, aren't often shown in the light that we're showing them in this film.
And the trailer for Ali's Wedding is out.
Yes.
So if anyone wants to head to YouTube,
yes,
type in Ali's Wedding, they'll be able to see the trailer.
They will.
And we've got, like, it's fabulous. I've seen it and I love it.
Yeah, there's a great, like, because I think the film comes out end of August, so, you know, they're on like a Facebook page or whatever updates things, and there's great little, you know, photos and things about the story. But it's, but boy, it was a fantastic adventure, and I was so welcomed into that community and into people's homes and mosques and things that, you know, that I hadn't experienced. And that was one of the great byproducts of doing what I do for a living, was to, you know, to have an experience like that. That's the great gift of doing it, is to be able to, you know, have that and have a reason, you know, to actively want yourself to go and be more open-minded and explore things.
Absolutely. I think we're all looking forward to that. So that's August.
August.
It's released.
Yes, end of August.
So look out for Ali's Wedding and
go.
go check out the trailer on YouTube. It looks fabulous.
Good. Thank you.
I think we're heading back to the Scott School in Albury, and I think Meg has a question for Jeff. So Meg, if you're there, would you like to ask Jeff your question?
Yeah, my question was, what pathways are there, I guess, for aspiring filmmakers and directors?
Yeah, that's a great question.
So the question was, thanks Meg, that was a great question. So what pathways are there for aspiring directors or filmmakers?
Well, the greatest thing, we were actually chatting about it, like this, what we're doing today is this is actually a pretty easy setup for us, you know, and we're able to talk to so many people around Australia and actually, you know, inevitably around the world, you know, with this. So I think the amazing thing with today is that, like, as a filmmaker or as a director, the amount of equipment that you need to really get going on it is completely inside your phone. So an example is, this is not a high-end example, but it's an example that if I have, you know, I've got, you know, really little kids. So let's say their 3rd birthday comes around, and that day I'll shoot on my iPhone some really great footage, and I'll, you know, use 120 frames a second, get some slow-mo, and then I'll edit it on my iPhone with iMovie at the end of the day, and I'll lay a really cool track that I've got from, you know, iTunes on it or whatever, and then I send it out to all our family who happen to be, you know, elsewhere. And it looks like a movie. You know, and granted, I do it for a living, it should look pretty good, but it looks fantastic. And all I've got is that one little device. So the thing that used to be a problem is that, you know, I used to have to shoot, when I was making short films in the mid-90s, I was shooting them on film, you know, so you'd have to, like, I was effectively stealing short ends, which is the little bit of film that's left over when when you make a television show or a movie, and I would go and try and have enough of those things together to be able to make a film. Then you had to process it, develop it, edit it in this, you know, digitally import it, all this sort of, you know, boring stuff. So the fantastic thing now is that the barrier that used to exist between you saying, I've got a great idea to tell this story, how am I going to do it, is not there. You only need to have the great idea and be able to make that idea achievable within your space. So if you do a big wild action sequence set, in downtown Sydney, that's a little tricky to pull off. But if you want to do a fantastic character-based, story set in an environment that is close to where you are, then you can absolutely go and make that film now and edit it, and it won't cost you any more, than your time and probably the amount of equipment that you've already got, or certainly your school has. So, the very short version of that answer, Meg, is just do it. Just go out and do it and make something. And it can be 2 minutes. It doesn't have to be 10 minutes or a sprawling epic. You just make a little 2-minute film. And I can tell you that it opens, believe it or not, those little 2-minute short films and everything else open as many doors as some of the television shows that I've directed, hour drama, big budget things or whatever. If you have a unique voice and you can use your voice and make that come through with either shooting it on digital SLR, an iPhone, anything you like. If you find a funny or a funny story or a bit of comedy, or you can tell a moving story and you tell it, people don't even care how you shot it. They just want to see it. And from there, all the doors open. University options open for filmmaking courses, everything, believe it or not, just from those little things. So don't be daunted by the scale and the scope of it all. Just get out there and do it. Even if it's bad, just do it. You'll have so much fun. It's wonderful.
That's great advice, and thank you, Meg, for that question. Hopefully you're inspired now to make your 2-minute, 3-minute movies if you haven't already, which probably Meg has.
I'm sure she has. If she asked the question, she's ready to go. Yeah.
Okay. Our next one, obviously your shift into becoming a director. You've mentioned about how you were fascinated about the sets and being on set. So you became a director quite young. I think probably some would say extremely young.
Yes.
Too
young, some would say. I think, but there you go. Yeah.
So how did you get your first role as a director? What was that on, and how did that come about?
Well, I came straight out of high school into an internship with a production company who made these 2 shows that I'd worked on, one called Ocean Girl and one called Thunderstone. And the producer was a guy called Jonathan Schiff, and he had spotted in me, knowing me since I was like 10 years old till I was 17, working on these shows as an actor with him. He knew that I just loved filmmaking. I just so, rap by it all. And he had loosely said, I don't know, obviously, it's evidenced by the fact he took, it all ended up eventuating, but he did say, look, when you finish school, if you want to come and spend some time with me at my company, you should do it. And now this isn't a huge, big production company. This is a boutique, maybe 10 employees, 8 employees, something like that, and he was willing to train me when I finished high school. So I finished high school, and I went in there. I deferred university, I think, at that point as well. So I was kind of putting all of my chips, in for this opportunity to train with him. And when I started with him, he said, listen, it might be 3 or 4 months. And I was like, that's kind of short, because in 3 or 4 months, I don't think I'm going to be ready to go out and do anything with this skill set. And it ended up growing into about, over a year and a half. And in that time, I was able to direct second unit, which is kind of the odds and ends shots of shows. Things like that show was a pirate show, so we would do shots of cannonballs and in the jungle and different things, whatever it was that would just help piece it all together. Not the most complicated shots to get, but for me it was a taste of like, okay, here's my list, here's my story I've got to tell. Here are my little shots I've got to get. Can I tell a story with those? And so I loved all that. So that was my first little foray into it. And then he said to me at the end of that year and a half, he said, well, you're ready to direct something. It's not going to be my shows because they're big budget and very hard to get onto, as I know with the projects he makes. But you're ready to work on something that's sort of like a television show that's up and going that you might be able to go and train further on. And that show was Neighbours. And so as a 19 or 20-year-old, 19 or 20, I was put forward to go and spend 2 months training under a director on Neighbours. And as a result of that, I got offered an opportunity to direct it. And I remember at the time the producer, who was so supportive and taking such a big gamble, because there are lots of directors who can just do it, but he was willing to take the chance and bring me in. And he said, now, if you do this, I would really like you to stick around and work with us for a year. And I said, I'm so excited, I'll work with you forever, I'll be here forever, And so I was there for about, I think it ended up being 9 months, which might amount to about maybe 45 episodes or something like that. And then from there, more offers started to come in, and I was pursuing other things. And and then as I kept going, the offers that come in from a directorial point of view were getting more prestigious each time, and so I just kept chasing that next elusive job, and that's been my wacky journey.
And I imagine something like Neighbours, which is a soap opera,
Yeah.
would have daily, it would be fairly intensive.
Yes, it'll never be as hard as Neighbours again.
So as a
basically,
training
yeah.
ground, as a first up
Fantastic.
experience, how beneficial was that?
It's unbelievable, really, because not so much as if you want to be a creative art house or director's director person, that doesn't necessarily give you that, but it does give you the ability to know how to shoot a large volume of work, make decisions really quickly, work really quickly with your crew, be articulate with your crew and your cast. You're not going to get to sit there and be ponderous. You've got to really keep it moving. So the way they sort of work out how a shoot day is that, let's say on a big TV show or something, you might do 4 or 5 pages of script per day. So you look at a script, it's like this fat, and you're going to do 5 pages per day, and then you do that for often enough and you've made the show. On Neighbours, it would be nothing to shoot 29 pages in a day. So you've just got to be so on your game and work so quickly. And I remember I almost had like a Neo in the Matrix moment of when I was really struggling with Neighbours in the first couple of times to finish it on time and make it good, and suddenly everything just went click, and I understood exactly what I had to do to not only make it a great episode of that show, but also to shoot it on time, which is a really big important part for everyone making that show, because it's such a complicated show to schedule and everything. And I remember from then on, I felt like on that show I was in the zone, and then I had that confidence that no matter what day could be thrown at me now, I'd be able to get through it. And I'm certainly not alone. I work continuously with crew who came from that background and that fast turnaround television, and you can put them under any levels of pressure and they'll come through for you.
And I imagine for students watching that the discipline of the director, as well as the creative outcome of on time, on budget, those constraints you have to operate under, which I imagine with Neighbours it would have been pretty strict.
Yes, absolutely.
Rather than where you just might be making something creative that you can take as long as you like and have unlimited budget.
It's so funny that like even, you can chat to big directors who make $100 million films and they're still complaining they want an extra 40 million. I had an extra 40 million on this film, I'd be able to do it, or another 20 days of shoot. So I think that, all productions are trying to reach beyond, what they've actually got. And so being used to that is kind of, you just have to take it as what it is that, when we made, the Dance Academy movie that came out, we had huge aspirations for that, and we didn't really have a big budget at all, but we wanted to go to New York and wanted to have whole dance companies on stage, and somehow, like with just being being a bit lean and mean and as clever as you can be with the allocated budget that you've got, you can bring all those things together.
This is a question come in from Alex from Carey Baptist Grammar, and it's about, I suppose, how you're dealing with cast. How do you overcome personal differences with cast members in your shows? So how do you get that sort of nice collaborative environment operating?
Well, I think that by my nature, I'm a nice person. I don't have I'm not a combative person. I'm very happy to go head to head, in a philosophical or intellectual or whatever chat with anybody, but I just don't have in me that sort of fire where I've got a temper or I've got anything like that. So ultimately what it means is that, I'm always and I've worked with lots of actors who I know that aren't my personality type, or that I wouldn't necessarily be friends with outside of this project, but in that moment we're all working toward one thing, and if I think that they're capable of giving a great performance, I will absolutely work to whatever they need. The thing is that sometimes you're going to ask an actor to do something that they think is not working, or it brings out an insecurity in them, or I don't want to cry, my character wouldn't do this, my character wouldn't do that, and so you have to sort of go a bit of a journey on that. And often it's compromise, you sort of go, okay, well, how about this? What if we, try a version like this? What if we do one like that? And and then I'll go as far as I'll say, I'll invite you into the edit in the end of the shooting of it, or I will show you this and you decide, but I think this is the right way to go. But ultimately, a lot of that sort of groundwork of relationships is done when you're in pre-production, before you've even started shooting, when they've got the job, when you've offered them the job, wherever it is, that hopefully there's trust. Now, that's not true of all sets. I mean, there are some really famous fights and blow-ups and rivalries and all kinds of things. But for me, I find, when I was an actor as a kid, I used to find any of those, anyone shouting, anyone disagreeing, I found it as a huge distraction. I often used to think, and I think I used to find it with teachers too, that if a teacher would shout and scream, you know, everyone would, like, they wouldn't even hear what the person was shouting. They'd just say, did you hear that person shout before, and whisper and da-da-da. So for me, I was much more about, like, you know, just kind of trying to keep controlled and focused and even-tempered, and through that, I think you can sort of negotiate and therefore, you know, deal with anybody, any personality type. There are lots of people that I walk away with and I might, in confidence to someone close to me, just go, man, that person's a nightmare, you know, and really hard to deal with. But I would like to think that they probably wouldn't have had that experience. They would have felt like, yeah, he was okay. Yeah, he was okay. You know, all that sort of stuff, instead of going, you know, I want to throttle that person or something, you know, because it's a creative industry. It's so subjective, you know, like, so anyone might think this is great, someone else thinks it's terrible. That's a great idea. That's the worst idea I've ever heard. So you are constantly dealing with that, and that's where a lot of the tensions come from.
And I suppose for you, it's about bringing out the best in the cast in terms of the outcome.
Yes, absolutely.
However you do that, in terms of the environment you create and their working relationship with you, it's about that best outcome you can get.
Absolutely. And I would think that there are a lot of people who would say, they've worked with, you know, definitely, like, you know, I've worked with better directors than Jeff and everything, but there's not many people that I would have worked with that would go away and really, like, hate me at the end of it, you know, because I work for them, you know, I'm only working for them. So I'm not the director who comes in, director with a capital D, comes in and blasts through a megaphone and this is it, you know. I'm there to make them do, you know, be happy in that creative process and do a great job for the project, you know. So that's the thing that always is the most important to me, and I think naturally, and also because I'm so grateful to be doing what I'm doing, I'm not going to come in and be an idiot, you know, and be rude to everybody. And so, you know, I just I think the gratitude factor helps those conversations move along nicely as well.
Absolutely. All right, I think we're going to head back to the Scott School in Albury, and Amy had a question for you. Amy, are you there at the Scott School?
Yeah. My question was, what was it like working with the Modern Family cast?
So Amy's question was, what was it like working with the Modern Family cast?
Well, it's like one of the great, to be completely frank, it's one of the great treats of my life. I mean, they're actually, like you guys are sitting at that school, I don't know if everyone can see that, but you guys are all sitting at that nice table like that. That's how we start each week on Modern Family, with all the cast just sitting there as comfortably as you guys are. And they get their little name card out in front of them, like we need to be told, you know, but we always know who they are, but they've still got their name card. And the writers sit in the room and they just read the script from start to finish. They're really funny, they're really dedicated, and they love their job and they can't believe they're on this mega hit. I think the thing is that the cliche would be that, you know, you work with this cast on a big show and they're all going to have egos, and they just don't. I mean, you know, they're just there to work. They're there to work. We shoot really quick days on Modern Family by any standards, not just by, you know, US standards or whatever. We shoot really fast on Modern Family, and that keeps it fun. It keeps it light. And so the cast come in, they know they're not going to be there till 2 a.m. trying to get this scene. You know, I prepare it, you know, when I work with them, and I'm sure everyone else, they prepare it really well so that it shoots very quickly, you know, that all those scenes in the kitchen, everyone crossing around it, and it all just happens in 1-2 camera setup, and it's, you know, and then we try and investigate, you know, trying to get as much comedy out of it, and they've got ideas, and they're all very respectful, and, you know, yeah, it's just a treat. I was very intimidated when I started there because it was probably the first show that I'd watched that I was directing that I really thought, well, this is a really fantastic series. And I thought, what if I come in and I do the worst episode of this show, and I can't find, you know, the same funny, or I can't get into their voice or whatever it is. So for me, it was intimidating, but they made me feel really welcome. They were curious about me because, you know, I'm the only Australian director on it, and so, you know, everything to do with Australia is kind of interesting. They made an episode in Australia actually that I consulted with them on, and they're just an absolute treat. And I've heard them say things like, even from the showrunner down, who's the guy who creates it, and, you know, these guys make a fortune each week. They're doing all this, but they'll say the thing that we would want them to say, which is like, we could tell people how lucky we are for being in Modern Family or creating Modern Family, but they'll never know how lucky we actually feel, because it's, you know, everyone over there spent so long trying to get that role, trying to do this, and they made a show that, you know, is an international hit, you know, where it got big ratings, and on top of all of that, you know, everyone got to win an award or two over the years, and so critically they feel appreciated, and at a commercial level they feel appreciated, and financially they feel appreciated. So they bring, you know, that sort of level of happiness, you know, to the set each day, and I benefit from that.
That comes through in your answer, clearly.
Yes, that's it. That's it.
We've just had a question come through from a Queensland school here, Moreton Downs State School. What is the worst thing that has happened to you as a director?
Ooh.
I don't know whether you can tell us this one.
The worst thing that's happened. I think that for me, I remember basically like the fear as a director is that you don't get judged always as a director on like how look at the end episode and there it is. It's great, terrific, you'll get more work. The scary thing sometimes as a director is like having a bad morning. You know, when things aren't clicking, you're running really late, you know, and actors come in and they're not happy with the script and all of this sort of stuff. I remember when I was one of the very first television shows I directed, I would have only been, you know, 21 or something. And we had 2 days to shoot in one location. And the first day was a disaster. It was by every way that you could assess it, it was a disaster. We hadn't finished the scenes. The very last shot of the day is the thing you definitely don't want to do last, which was a big harness rig, flying effects and all this sort of stuff. And I had a moment where I looked at a door across the room while all of this, you know, chaos is going on. I thought, I wonder if I just walked out that door right now and got in my car and left, what would be the worst thing that would come of that? It's not that bad. Someone would do it for whatever. So I had my little moment then. So I think that, you know, like sort of losing control of what you're trying to do on set as a director is the most nerve-wracking. The great thing with that is that I went home and had a really hard think, and the next day came in and we had, at that point, I think I had probably the best day that I'd had on set the next day, making up for it, but also just like had thought about it so much more that I felt more confident. For me, you know, the worst thing for me is just, you know, not being prepared enough to be able to deal with you know, the obstacles that come up each day, or deal with a really clever actor who's thought about it a lot more than you. You know, I think they're the things that are the greatest challenges. And then ultimately, you know, like where, you know, you hope that the sum of all of those parts means that you're putting out a great television show, you know, but sometimes a bad 15 minutes can throw you off for a whole day, you know, so it's a high pressure job in that regard, I guess.
And I imagine you mentioned earlier in terms of every day can be different. So I imagine it's not predictable. You can't assume I'll turn up, it's going to be a template of what I've done previously. You have to be prepared for the unexpected.
Absolutely. And also prepared that like everything may go wrong today, you know. I heard that Spielberg said, I think in an interview, that when he was asked about what the hardest part of directing was, is just getting out of the car in the morning and facing it all. So, you know, you're sitting there, you're pulled up and you're like, here we go, and then the day begins and the questions start and everything else, and what are we going to do? Okay, it's going to rain this afternoon, we need to move all of that in, so how are we going to rewrite this? And how many, you know, what colour jacket should that be? And like just, you know, the bombardment, you know, and all you have to do is be wrong, you know, like on, you know, maybe 50% of your answers, and you've made a terrible show and had a terrible day. You have to be, you know, sort of like, I think about 9 out of 10 good answers a day, and that's, you know, for a lot of questions, it's you know, that's a lot of, you've got to be right a lot. To make it all click for both being a good day and ultimately be a great film. And that's when, you know, for anyone who's at home who loves, you know, really great television shows and really great films, there's a certain alchemy and magic that's gone on to make that happen. It's not just like, yes, it's a good film, and like any good film is an absolute miracle that it's worked out good, because in any other hands it could have gone completely differently. So that's the miraculous part of it all, I guess, you know, and that's what keeps you coming back.
And they're the days you go home and say to your wife, I had a fantastic day.
I had a fantastic day today, it was so much fun, you know, this happened, that happened. And the others, I come home, I just probably go quiet, just sit in the dark room for a while and rock fetally, but yes. So, you know, it's a combo of those two that make hopefully a good project.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier the Dance Academy movie, which you directed, which came out in April this year, which was fabulous. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I believe you directed the first 5 episodes of the Series 1 of Dance Academy, which would have been back in 2009?
Yes, that sounds right, yeah.
So you basically came back 7 years later to direct the film with pretty much the exact same cast.
All these kids that we'd cast all these years
ago. So what was
yeah.
that like coming back from, you were there right at the start when some of the actors were 15, 16 years of age, and coming back, they were 22, 23, and making what was really an adult film, the Dance Academy movie. What was that like as an experience, Jeff?
Well, unrepeatable. I mean, just such a strange set of events, really, that you would do that. I mean, we cast, particularly, like the lead girl in Dance Academy, who plays Tara, Zhenya, was 15 when she came in and auditioned for Dance Academy. And she'd never acted in her life. She was, she's a dancer and is a dancer first and foremost, but is a wonderful actor. If you've seen the film, she's so great. She she's in like 110 scenes in that movie, and she charts that emotional journey perfectly, in tears, and she's happy, and she does this whole thing. So she's extraordinary. But when she started, she'd never set foot on a film set before. She'd never done any acting training really, to speak of. She was a full-time ballerina, as a 15-year-old. So to come back and re-meet these guys, and I have seen them, sporadically over the time, but to re-meet them as adults, and I have to say, for anyone who's seen the film, like their lives, not necessarily specific to them, their lives do parallel the broader ensemble. So that sense of going to America to make it big, or I'm at home but I want to go over there, or I had an opportunity and it sort of didn't happen that way. I mean, they've all lived a version of what those characters have lived on that film. And so I just completely drew all of that out of them to sort of, say, well, what was that like? I mean, Keenan had been in, who plays Ollie, had been in the Divergent films and everything, like huge franchises in The Flash, and, so I was asking him about what that journey was like to, try and want this thing, and then suddenly it just goes kaboom, and that was kind of, part of what that storytelling was. So re-meeting all of those actors and re-entering that world was very special. I have to say, when I first heard about the film, I wasn't so sure that, I thought, well, what, there would have been an option to sort of almost arrest them in that age that they were still at the academy or something, and because that's what everyone knew the show as. I mean, for people who've seen the film, there's the academy isn't even in the film, so it's called Dance Academy. There isn't an academy there. It's more the fact that the Dance Academy itself has bound these group of friends together for life, and it's had such a big impact on them that it'll affect all of their career journeys, particularly during their 20s. When I read Sam Strauss's script for it, and I realised that she wanted to tell a very mature story, and in a sense, it's almost like an anti-ballet film in some regards, because what it says is that, you'll follow your dream, but at what cost, And what Tara, the character, has to realise in it is that she's got value beyond her dream. That dream cannot define her, because if it goes away, or if there's a reason you can't do that thing anymore, you're still really important, really valuable, and you can bring so much to the world. But she can't be told that. She has to experience it, go to New York, do all this, a bit like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, can't realise or appreciate home until she's left it and had this fantastical adventure. So that was, that was the thing that drew me in, and it was just then telling that story with that cast, with that history, became, kind of a second nature.
And for those that haven't seen the Dance Academy movie, it is tremendous. Got wonderful reviews, so congratulations to Jeff for that. I'm conscious we only have a couple of minutes to go, a minute or two to go. What I'd like to touch on perhaps to finish off is, you've been successful both in the UK and the USA, which for someone of your age, from an Australian background, highly unusual. So one, how did you get a foot in the door to becoming a director overseas? And what are the major differences between directing here in Australia compared to the US, for example?
Well, I think that Australia has a platform, like the English and the Americans are really curious in Australia, by Australians. We produce some of the best talent in the world. There's just no two ways about it. To have, like Lion and Hacksaw Ridge made in Australia just last year alone, and see what those films did in terms of being in the top level of films made in the entire world. We're a tiny country with all this talent, So I think that, for me, I had done television shows. I did a show called Angry Boys with Chris Lilly that was shot for HBO and the BBC, but shot in Australia. So when I went over to the States, they thought that show was fantastic, really funny, really quirky, really weird, and we want to be in business with you. That sounds great, So that was the thing that opened the door for me in the US. To work for the BBC, I think it was the Jack Irish television shows that I did for the ABC, and Rake and a couple of other shows. So they certainly opened doors. But I would say this, that like growing up in Australia, don't see it as any limitation whatsoever. It's actually, quite affordable to fly over to the US. Even, I think these days it's probably half the price it was 10 years ago. So to go over and take meetings and have, if you're a filmmaker, have a voice and make a great film, people will watch it, and people are interested, and people are watching what we're doing here in Australia. So follow it really hard, and don't think that the limit is I might make it and this might happen. Not only can it reach Australian audiences, but audiences all over the world.
Yeah. Absolutely. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I really want to thank you, Jeff. I think it's been a great insight for students all over Australia, both from your acting career to your directing. We'd like to thank all of the schools that participated.
Yes, I'm very grateful to you guys.
I
Thank you so much.
apologise for all of those
there.
who've sent in questions that we couldn't answer, but thank you so much. And if you'd like to watch the YouTube version of this, it'll be online on the ACTF YouTube channel in a week or two. So thank you so much,
Thank you,
Jeff,
guys.
for your wonderful
I can see you
insight
all there. Thank
and
you.
time. And thank you to everyone out there, schools all around the country. We hope you've enjoyed this morning's webinar.